Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today. This is going to be a excellent lunchtime webinar, one of the first of many that we're doing here at Abroaden. And I thought that we're just about to enter into tax season, it would be a really great occasion to sit down and talk with an actual tax expert here in Spain, who can help us understand what we have to do as people living abroad here, as foreigners here in Spain, to file taxes. And for that, I found my friend Louis Williams, who is the co-founder and CEO of Entre Tramites. Entre Tramites, and Louis, please stop me if I pitch this incorrectly, is a service to help us foreigners living in Spain understand how to do administrative services in Spain better. It helps us do these things that on paper look incredibly easy, but as you know, living here in Spain, it's absolutely the opposite of that. And they do all sorts of things like taxes, some legal assistance. I believe you do NIEs as well. Again, I don't want to missell your own company. So Louis, thank you so much for being here. And yeah, how about you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Louis, one of the co-founders of Entre Tramites. We're an accounting and legal firm who basically cover everything boring that you can imagine in Spain. So whether it's tax, immigration, property law, if we don't do it, I'm pretty certain we've got a partner we can pass you on to. We started just before the beginning of COVID. We're a 75-person team, and we deal with everything dull that you can imagine, and we're here to help, trying to offer a reasonable price service and stop ripping off the foreigners who pay 4 or 5 times the price they should do for services in Spain. So here and happy to help and ready to answer any questions that Elliot might have on this Q&A session.
Yeah, so what I thought we'd do, and I got my own questions, and I think it'd be, we'll just kind of dive into the things we should know. At the end, the chat should be active, so you'll be able to ask questions here about, anything, you might have on your mind to this session. But just to hop into it. So, well, for us in Spain, like, what are some of the particularities of filing our taxes here that we really need to be aware of? Because we all come from different places in the world. The rules are slightly different. I'm from the United States. You're from the UK. Like, what are some things here that might be unique that we might not necessarily think about that we should be aware of?
Okay, so there are 2 elements I'd like to touch on that first off.
Sure.
One is the thing of the Modelo 720. So one of the filings which you're required to do by the 31st of March in Spain is if you own more than 50,000 euros of assets overseas, you have to declare that these exist to the Spanish government. Now, there was some fake news, effectively, which was saying, hey, the courts ruled it was illegal and therefore it didn't exist anymore. That's completely untrue. What they've ruled is that the level of fines were disproportionate. And so they made a change, so the fines for non-compliance now are aligned with other informative filings, which is, of course, a massive relief that you're not going to be chased for 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 euros on the fact that you failed to declare you had a 55,000 euro bank account, which, of course, was very excessive. The second thing is that on income tax return season, the reason that they tell you that, in most cases, you will need to declare income taxes. They only have 2 categories under which you don't necessarily have to file the declaración de la renta. If your employment earnings are less than 22,000 euros from one employer or less than 14,000 from 2 employers. Actually, if you've got overseas earnings more than like 1,000 euros, approximately, you always have to file. So one of the mistakes which people have is that they think that, I don't need to file. The second thing that people think is, I've only made 20,000, I shouldn't file. Actually, the reason why they say that you don't have to file is usually if you're within the band of 14,000 to 22,000, your employer has been withholding more in taxes than they needed to. And so they just don't let you file, say that you don't need to, because you've probably overpaid the taxes which you're going to do. So it's always worth checking if you're within that band between 14 to 22K. But if you have foreign earnings, you pretty much will need to file. The other important thing to be aware of, which is if you haven't been abroad previously, is that Spain, like many other countries, taxes your global earnings and global income. So the fact that you've got a house overseas and you're paying some tax in another country on the rental income of that does not mean you do not file for it here in Spain. You do get a tax credit in most cases for the taxes paid in other jurisdictions. So if I was going to start Modelo 720, informative filing, if you hold assets of more than 50,000, if you have foreign income, you do need to file the income tax return. And three, if you do have foreign assets, they are not excluded from taxation in Spain. They are taxable, but there is double tax relief. And double tax relief does not mean that if you've paid tax in the other country, you pay nothing in Spain. It just means that you won't pay the full tax in one country and the full tax in the other. You pay the higher combination, which results in the higher of one of the two. That's one confusion which does a lot.
Yeah, that really goes into that's very interesting points that you make, because, like, if you're an American, I think there's a couple on the call, we always have to pay our taxes wherever we live back to the US. But I think there's that misconception is, like, if you live in Spain, you're only liable for income you're generating in Spain, and that's not at all the case. I don't think anywhere in the EU there's what would be territorial taxation. It's instead residence. So, it's that whole worldwide income thing, and I think that gets quite complicated. And if I was in that situation, like where I have some maybe rental property in the UK or even like in the Netherlands, like how difficult would it be for me to get that information? Like, what sort of prep tips would you recommend that I'd want to do to make that filing easier?
So first thing is, so that you can get tax credit reclaims, an important thing is doing a non-resident filing as soon as possible in the other country. To give an example, I've got a property in London which I've got rented out. So what do? Beginning of April, I file so you can start filing from the 6th of April in the UK, 5th, 6th. I usually file by the 10th, 11th of April, my taxes in the UK for the UK tax year, because the UK tax year is weird. It goes over a slightly different period. The reason I do that is because that gives me a tax credit, which I can then combine with the last year's tax return, so that when I file US returns, not US returns, Spanish returns, I can use the tax credit. I can use the tax credits. And this is one thing which is very important. So in general, if you've got assets or income in the other jurisdiction, the US is slightly more complex because you've almost got a back and forth between, depending if you have US sourced income and everything else, the order can be different. But usually what you should do for the UK and for the Netherlands and anything else like that, Germany, file early. And particularly if you've got any Germans on the call, they'll be very surprised on that, because in Germany, they're so used to filing 2 years afterwards, a year and a half afterwards, but you can file almost instantly. So file early in the other country so that you can get your tax credit, because otherwise you might end up double paying tax.
That's very interesting. So it's really like you want to be strategic about where you're filing to make sure that, wherever you have that source revenue, that you get that information first, because then that way.
Yeah, because you can't avoid paying that tax. You have to pay that tax if you've got a passive asset. So if you've got a rental property, or if there's dividend withholding tax, which depends on jurisdiction, you have to make that filing first, because otherwise you then have to do a refiling, try and do a tax reclaim, and we know how slow the Spanish government is paying back money.
Right.
So you could be out of pocket having to pay two countries fully.
Right?
Yeah, they're very good at that, but paying back, they do take the time.
Yeah. Okay, now that's excellent to know. And again, I think it's really important to, for us living abroad, we just have to think about these orders of operations that you just wouldn't normally consider if you were just a purely never left Spain or you never left your home country sort of point of view. Then on that, if I wanted to file, like, how would I want to do it? Like, it's like, would I have to go onto a website? Would I like technically you can do it yourself here in Spain? Like, what would that process look like?
So if you have a very simple filing, the first thing I'd recommend is everybody should get a digital certificate. If you have no discounts such as rental, flat income, or anything else, you can just generate the draft borrador from the Agencia Tributaria website and file the Modelo 100, which is Modelo 100, which is the Declaración de la Renta. Now, if you have children, if you have rental income, if you have rental costs, it might be worth hiring somebody to actually review what discounts might be available to reduce your tax return. If you need to claim dual tax relief because you have assets and investments overseas, I highly, highly recommend hiring somebody, because that can get quite complicated of where to file that, in what box. It's on something like page 94 that they've got a slot. I can't remember. It's like 10 from the end of the Declaración de la Renta. It varies every year. And to be clear, even we don't know which page it is yet, because it only gets published 10 days from now. So as soon as publication occurs, we go and check and go, okay, what new forms or addendums have they added? It usually has pretty much the same structure. It's usually almost exactly the same. It's just that what used to be on page 20 might now be page 22. So if you've got a very simple return, you only have labor earnings, you don't have rental costs or anything to claim, probably just click and file and you can probably just generate the borrador. But the critical thing for that is the digital certificate. So certificado digital is the most useful.
I think we might have lost. I think you might have dropped it for just a second.
Oh, just cut. So all I was reinforcing was the digital certificate is critical. That is the gateway to everything bureaucratic in Spain.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I've done that myself. It's a bit of a, I don't know if anyone else has done this, but like you have to go, you file for it on, I think it's the Mint, like the people who used to print the money, they're the ones who issue it, and then you have to go to an office and get it approved. And so it's, and like if you own a company here, you have to get it anyways to administer it. And it's an interesting process, but I think like once it's done, like your e-government interaction here gets easier. I mean, you still have to deal with old web design, but like that's definitely a good idea. And like I know, like I get this question a lot because I spend a lot of my time in co-working spaces, and a lot of freelancers here, autonomos. Is there something that they need to be particularly aware of as they're going through? Because again, they have different income needs than employees who just get that monthly pay and maybe a bonus here and there.
So critical thing, if you're an autonomo in your first 2 years, ask your accountant if they're making a claim on inicio de la actividad. So inicio de la actividad it is subjectively at the discretion of the civil servant, but is usually approved, is an option for the first year or 2 years, where you can be taxed on only 80% of your income rather than the full 100%, up to 100K. Above 100K, it's fully taxed. There's no discretionary part on that. But that's quite a nice tax break, which you can claim in your first 2 years as an autonomo. Beyond that, actually, a lot of the tax breaks in the ending declaración de la renta is the same whether you're an employee or self-employed. The big thing as an autónomo, as a difference, is much more to do with the quarterly filings and what expenses you can file and what you can't file. If you are used to the UK, Netherlands, US, you are going to be disappointed. Spain is more restrictive on certain expense categories, basically.
Yeah, that's been my understanding. At one point it was a little bit different, and then it just didn't. I guess we couldn't have nice things, and the government took a lot of that away. And are there any like tax breaks that maybe we're not aware of that we should be looking at?
So there are tax breaks which won't help for this tax season, but will have help for next tax season because you need to do the action within the tax year. But if you invest in a startup in Spain, for every 100 euros you invest, you can get 50 euros off your tax bill, 50 euros straight off your income tax bill. So they've created quite a nice incentive scheme for emerging Spanish enterprises. And one interesting thing on that is they actually traded a discount because the Spanish capital markets have been harder to access. They traded a discount compared to most other foreign startup markets. So it's much more risky. I can't advise on any particular startup investment whatsoever. And I don't know, actually, the only other one is, do we have anybody from the Canary Islands here? There's Islas Canarias. If anybody has, just pop a comment in the section. If not, I'll skip over. But the Canary Islands has some nuanced advantages for investment in hotels, real estate, and locality under basically what is the reinvestment reserve in the Canaries, which was extended for the employed. Now, if we don't have people in the Canary Islands, I'll skip over that. But if you are in the Canary Islands, feel free to get in touch. We can touch on a couple of the tax breaks, which might be highly relevant for you. That's I would touch on at the moment. But on the autonomous side, that's basically it's more limited. It's more limited in general.
Okay. Yeah, good to know. No, I mean, like you come from other countries where you have very interesting credits, like where you can deduct the interest you pay on your mortgage, and you can write off certain activities. And unfortunately, we don't have that here in Spain.
No.
So excellent. And then I know.
There is one thing which has been expanded is actually home improvements. So every autonomous community have slight differences, but if you've got home improvements to do with adding insulation or anything and you own the property, there are certain tax breaks for effectively things which you do to make it more environmentally friendly, potentially solar panels, those associated features. So that is one thing worth looking at for subsidies and tax breaks on electric vehicles.
Okay. Okay. Just excellent. So on that, we've got a few more minutes, and I'd love to leave some time for some Q&A. Are there some like reporting and filing mistakes that you see people making that they need to be aware of?
First thing, please be honest. The unfortunate thing which you find is you've got a, let's call it a slightly traditional industry, which tells people it's fine. How are they going to know? You leave some cash there, take a bit on the side. How do they know BISMs? So lots of people were taking, for instance, BISM transfers and assuming that nobody was going to tax it. The tax authorities have all those transactions. Separate to me. They're not actually seeing it. One of the things to be very aware of on this is there is no statutory limitations for tax evasion. So what that means is that if you fail to declare income, they can pursue you until you're 80, 90. It doesn't matter. It's not like after 4 years you're safe. Unfortunately, lots of Spanish advisors passed on, let's say, the traditional cash advice to the new digital era we're operating in. And it's governments might not find you this year, next year, 3, 4 years from now. But I mentioned the US and LLCs for a second. The US recently passed legislation which has massively increased the observation of the tax filing and the beneficial owner requirements to do with the LLCs. So lots of overseas owners of LLCs who've been hiding their income, pretending and ignoring the income they made in their LLC while saying they were living offshore, haven't realized that they pledged to the US government that they were declaring their income in Spain and declaring their social security and paying everything in Spain and then not declaring it. So people are getting caught up where they are both violating not just Spanish tax law, but US tax law in a squeeze around it. And as digital work and everything has grown, governments are very aware of this. There are massive departments basically planning a squeeze on it. So my biggest piece of advice is please, please, please do not hide and say, oh, I've got it over in an overseas account. No one knows, it's fine. Because you could end up with a really nasty surprise at the end of the day. So that's the first piece of advice. The second one is with the tax filings. One of the most useful things is if you've got foreign clients, overseas clients, is an expense. If you are an autonomous or any of those, that's one of the areas where usually the tax authorities are most flexible. When you're flying out to visit and pay. One of the critical reasons is because you never make a VAT reclaim. So the Spanish tax authorities are much more sensitive on VAT reclaims than general expenses.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you know if there's any reason why they have that preference to scrutinize VAT more?
I think it's because with VAT, they do lots of studies to show the level of VAT fraud which is across the EU, and it's quite significant to people making false claims. But one of the reasons is let's use the example of you buy a laptop. If you buy a laptop for 605 euros, 105 euros of that is VAT, which you can claim back instantly. So because VAT is an instant claim back, and with VAT, whereas with expenses, you can only reduce your tax liability. With VAT, you can have a reclaim. The Spanish tax authorities see that as their money being taken away. So for instance, if you've got clients overseas, so you're not charging VAT, but you're reclaiming VAT on expenses, the Spanish government are a lot more likely to check, review, and test those expenses. Whereas overseas expenses with no VAT reclaims, first off, they know that you can't necessarily get the same style of invoice or expense that you would have within Spain. So they know it's harder to have the same details as you'd have on VAT receipts. And secondly, you're never making necessarily a reclaim on that. It's just a reduction in the total tax you pay. So they're less sensitive.
No, it makes total sense. Like, so yeah, they don't want money taken out of their pocket. Basically, they're trying to keep their pot as full as possible. So excellent. I think we could probably open up the floor to some Q&A. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. assuming I have enabled the chat, which I believe I did.
Yeah, I was just thinking, just to test it, can I just ask anybody
Go for
here
it.
to just try and write in the chat, just write hi, just to confirm that actually you guys can write in the chat. I think, hang on a second, let everyone send messages. I've just activated let everyone send messages. Guys, anybody who wants to write in the chat, it should now work.
There we go.
Hi,
All
yes,
right.
thank you, Harry. Now it's working. Sorry about that, guys. Please fire away with questions. We didn't mean to completely ignore you. Sorry on that. One technical issue non-resolved. So, anybody have any questions they'd like resolved? Don't worry about if you feel that it sounds stupid or anything else. We have plenty of what do you call it? I'm sure there's plenty of other people with the same question at the top of their tongues. Would like to know tips overview of tax and investments, my investor tax on crypto. Crypto is treated exactly the same as any other investment asset. So it goes into the base de ahorros. So on that, you pay capital gains tax. Now, I'm assuming you're not on Beckham's law. If you're on Beckham's law, it critically depends on if the assets are within Spain or not. Assuming you're not on Beckham's law, the tax on crypto, basically you pay tax on the capital gains. So if you bought some crypto at 100K, you sold it at 150K, you would pay tax on the 50K. That tax is 19 to 28%, depending on what your gains are. So base de ahorros is 19% on the first 6,000, 21% on the next 44,000, 23% on the next 150,000 until you get to 200K. And then it's 27% for 100K, 28% onwards above that. In terms of other investments, whether you're talking real estate investment trusts, stocks, shares, any of those asset categories, it is the same. And Spain's actually relatively simple when we come to dividends, interest, and capital gains. It all falls in the same bucket. So it's all taxed this 19 to 28% rate. Glad that could help, Harry. So, Amanda, for the 50K of assets overseas, is that total or 50K per asset? For example, 50K in a mutual fund, 50K in an IRA. So, IRAs and pension assets are excluded from 720 filing until you hit retirement age. Like weird nuance. However, brokerage accounts, Roth IRAs, ISAs, I'm just going through different common tax structures for different countries here. These they add them up. So if you have, let's say, 20K of investments in Apple stocks and shares directly held, you have 30K in another mutual fund, then you hit 50K, because within stocks and shares, you have 50K of assets. If you've got they've got basically three buckets where it comes into. So you've got stocks and shares, you've got cash, so cash and cash equivalents, which is 50K or more, or property. Now, property is quite weird. With property, let's say you own half of a property which is worth 75K. You might say, hey, okay, I don't need to file because my share is less than 50K. Actually, for property and only for property, they still require you to file if the total value of the asset which you have a stake in is worth more than 50K. So in almost all cases, if you own overseas property, you will need to file unless you've got property in a developing country with a particularly low value. Usually the property value is either it's the higher of the government approved value or the last purchase price, basically. So Arnold, the capital gains tax on US stocks. So under Beckham's law, if US stocks are held in brokerage accounts outside of Spain, you do not pay capital gains tax on them. So US stocks should be exempt from capital gains. An interesting thing is that dividends, there's a slightly weird one. So the US government often only withholds 15% on dividends if you're a resident in Spain. Under Beckham's law, technically, it should be more like they should charge the full rate as if you were a non-treaty country. But in practice, most brokerages do not withhold more. But this is where we get into quite nuanced detail. But for capital gains tax, basically any assets you have outside of Spain and they're held outside of Spain, and if you are under Beckham's regime, are non-taxable. But Distributions from an LLC are considered economic activity income. So if they're not dividends, if you haven't paid corporation tax before, yes, you do need to pay tax on that in under Beckham's law, same as any other labor income. And any work you perform physically outside of Spain, you do need to pay tax on. So, Arnold, does that answer your question? And Amanda, has that clarified your doubts? They're non-taxable in Spain. So US asset, from memory, US stocks have no capital gains withholding. Those US stocks have no capital gains withholding. There shouldn't be any capital gains on it. Perfect. Just thinking, Elliot, knowing that we're coming up to income tax return season and everything else, you'll be sharing a link for people if they need any help, correct? On that one? Or
yeah, so we have a special offer. Well,
Yeah.
I'll share it to everyone who signed up on Eventbrite, and I know a couple of people sent me a message because Eventbrite was acting a little bit wonky, so I can share that with you all. And yeah, I think it's I've been Louis for a little bit now, and I always love to dive into these like technical side of money. Maybe that's because I'm a bit of a finance nerd myself, but you know, like we focus more on the investing and wealth building side, but you can't do that without understanding the taxes. Or if there's a jurisdiction where taxes don't matter for investing, please let us know. I'm going to move there ASAP. You know, like it's these things like if we get those different pieces right, we can really secure our financial future. We can avoid mistakes.
And what Elliot's touching on here on the financial side is so critical. And a very interesting example of this is when we talk about Roth IRAs, ISAs, and all this. So you've got in many countries tax-free savings vehicles where you think, hey, I'm paying no tax on it. Or under Beckham's law, you're not paying tax in Spain. But for instance, you've got withholding taxes. So in Germany, you receive a dividend from a German stock, you're paying 15% tax, even though you have no tax in Spain. Germany applies it anyway. You have some countries which have 25% withholding tax. So you actually save no money under Beckham's on that investment asset because they apply a higher withholding tax than you'd pay in income tax anyway. So when we get to investment assets and investment structuring, there can be some real complexity when it comes to tax implications. Now, I'll be sincere, if your assets are less than 100K, even 200K, it's probably not going to make the biggest change in your life going into excessive planning. But if you're at the higher reaches, if you then go into 1 million of assets plus on that side, actually some of these nuances can really end up catching you out.
They add up.
They really add up on that side.
And that's the whole thing is like our objective at abroaden is to ensure that, well, hey, you maybe not have 100,000 or 200,000 euros now, but you know, if you do it right in 15, 20, 30 years, you do, or you have way more than that. And then that's really, you know, if you're aware of these things now and you're just thinking about it, then you're going to save yourself a headache, you know, down the road, headache or worse, getting into a situation where you don't have the money you thought you would have whenever you arrive at that goal. So yeah, it's definitely important to know these things, especially here in Spain, where they don't make it easy. Pretty much anything with the government here is not straightforward. It's always interesting to see Spain advertise, you know, we're becoming like the startup country where we're becoming, you know, very digital. And then you go into like the user side of it. You're like, wait a second, this doesn't seem quite right. But no, I think like a service like Entre Tramites that they can offer where they walk us through it and help us deal with that without bashing our heads on the table. I think it's worth, you know, whatever you have to pay. So.
And if you want to get other free advice, we also have a YouTube channel with tax guidance if you want to do anything yourself. We actually started, and that was one thing I didn't mention, we started a YouTube channel and blog site purely helping people for free with information on how to do these tax filings and everything else. So we know for some of you, if you may be lower income or anything on that, you might be looking to save a little bit here and there. If you feel like embarking on yourself, we've got YouTube videos which explain most of the procedures you need to do in Spain. Yes, I can. I'll share the English language one. 1 second. I will just pull this up on one side. And sure. I'm afraid I'm going to need to run for a flight in just a second. So Elliot, if you've got any last questions or anything if anybody has any last questions that they'd like.
For me, I mean, I could keep going. When we had our prep call. We talked for a good 30 minutes on just this subject, but I'm sure we can schedule another session if need be. So, Louis, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us. I'm sure I found it really interesting, especially the part about making sure you're planning your foreign filings first, just to be able to claim the credit. And yeah, for everyone else, I'll have a copy of, I'll be able to send you over that deal, and we'll have a copy of the recording, and we're going to throw that on our YouTube as well. So thank you all so much for being here. Louis, thank you again. Enjoy your flight. Enjoy the rest of your day. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.